It's Wednesday here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Cam Heyward showed up to OTAs yesterday. We're going to play clips from him speaking with the media, talking about his contract situation and a lot more. To talk with me about that is Alan Saunders here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like the video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. As I said before, we're joined by the man himself, Alan Saunders, here from SteelersNow.com. Alan, it's so good to have you back, man. But the Steelers were really glad to have someone back, and that was one Cam Heyward who showed up to OTAs. And, I think it was interesting that some of the things, we'll get into things that he said, but there were some people wondering, would he show up at all? Would he hold out? It's not a holdout in OTAs because it's not mandatory, but would there be a holdout in minicamp? How serious will this get? And all that kind of gets diffused with him showing up. Not that the contract situation settled, but the whole will he hold out thing, I think, is dead.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't really know what to make of his return. I don't think him not being at OTAs was a big deal. I wouldn't have thought anything of it if he didn't show up to OTAs. Now I'm kind of actually like, well, what changed? What happened? And he didn't really necessarily address that. I mean, he kind of did, but it sure doesn't seem like there's been any resolution on the contract front. So I don't know. I don't know where they are. I thought I was of the opinion that I didn't think this would be a particularly difficult contract negotiation. So I think the fact that he's back without a deal says that maybe it is. Maybe they are. I mean, he said he thinks they're going to be far apart. So I'm not sure how they could be that far apart. I guess we'll see. It's interesting.
It is interesting. There's a lot of aspects here. I want to get to what Cam actually said. I cut up certain parts. He spoke for a while on Tuesday, but I cut up different parts to kind of just get you guys a feel for him addressing some of the bigger things. One, where he is, how long he wants to play. And I thought he gave some interesting answers that that kind of force us to ask ourselves questions about, hey, what does the Steelers look like moving forward if Cam Heyward gets what he wants? Can he get what he wants while they get what they want? Here's Cam Heyward from Steelers OTA. Do you have a set goal for yourself or how many years you want to play in the NFL, or do you just take things year by year?
It was tough answering that question right after the season. I will say this, guys. I can't keep answering that question right after the season. That is not fair to the season. That's not fair to my family. But in my mind, I got 3 years, and I want to maximize them. I want to play at a high level, and I want to go deep in the playoffs. We got a good team, and I'm going to do my part to be ready for all those situations.
Sam, do you plan on practicing when you report to Latrobe, or is it a possibility that you might hold in and force negotiations?
I have not even thought that far. I'm taking it day by day. I told my agent, and we talked about it, and we were cool coming out here. I'll be here for many, and then I'll be there for training camp. I don't know what the work entails, but when we get there, we'll cross that bridge.
Why is it important for you to remain a Steeler for those 3 years?
There was a conversation between me, Omar, and Mike T. And there's certain guys that are one helmet guys. And I want to be one of those one helmet guys. There's a hunger and desire there. But that doesn't mean just hanging it up and calling it a career. To me, I think, I got more bullets to fire, and I'm excited to do that.
How do you feel physically? Are you back to 100%, close to 100%?
Yeah, the growing feels great. you know, I can't wait to not talk about my groin. But, you know, personally, I just think, you know, I'm feeling good. I'm able to run. I'm able to do everything I want. There's no limitations. Got most of my strength. It's just about getting the cardio down. For me, it's just, you know, I've been pushing it, trying to get stronger, trying to strengthen everything. Now it's just time to condition it and make sure it can, you know, be up to these conditions, and then training camp, and then season.
Where were you at the end of last year? I mean, were you ever 60%, 70% after you came back?
You know, it was more of just a game time decision every week. You know, I wasn't practicing on Thursdays. That was the first time in my career I really had to really just bite the bullet in that approach. And then it was just responding to a game. And then, you know, after the first game against Tennessee, it was, you know, just trying to climb up and dig myself out of a hole. But, you know, I wanted to get back, and I felt like I could. But I knew I wasn't going to be at 100%, but I had to push it to, you know, be there for my team.
Cam, to clarify, you reporting today isn't indicative of your contract
Nope,
status.
not at all.
Cam, you mentioned leadership and about how you want to be the best leader you can be. Do you use any of this time to, you know, speak with any of the veteran or the rookie players and try to, you know, give them some guidance as
Yeah.
they approach this new step?
Yeah, you know, whether it's on the field, off the field, you know, communication, dinners, just, you know, letting them know I'm available for them. You know, I think it can be something as little as just the steps on field goal block or field goal protection. You know, I've been doing it for 13 years. It's still crazy I'm still doing it, but, you know, those are the type of things I'm just giving guidance to. And then, you know, off the field, it's, you know, what to expect around the city, where you should be, how you can help yourself, you know, the little things.
Dan, what are you looking for in a new contract?
You know, I'm looking to be here. You know, the value is what we decide, but, you know, I think for me, I want to be, you know, valued at my position. You know, I understand I came off a rough season, but I don't think it's a step down of where I can play. You know, I think when I'm at the top of my game, I'm still, you know, top 5 player at my position. And, you know, I played a run in the past, and I bring leadership, and, you know, it's not anything I discount.
Cam, you plan to be here for mini camp and the start of training camp?
Yeah.
How difficult has it been the last 2 weeks to not be here? I mean, you said on your podcast the first time you've never not been at OTAs.
Yeah, it was difficult, but, like, you know, the thing I got very frustrated with was just when people questioned my communication with the team. You know, I was communicating with guys left and right, and, you know, front office, coaches, teammates, and all I care about is how I am with my teammates. I don't want them to ever think I don't care about them or how I'm not in it. And, you know, you can say whatever you want about me besides that, but I'll always dedicate anything I can to them. And I don't want that to ever be questioned.
So there's a lot of things that Cam Heyward covered there to talk about. I think I want to step back here and focus on the question about him saying he wants to play 3 more years, and he thinks he has 3 more years here, Alan, because that, I think, is a big part of all of this. Is, you know, money's one thing, right? But if Cam Heyward wants a deal that extends him a certain amount of years and isn't just a 1 or 2 year deal, that could also play a factor in this. I want to get your thoughts after this first break here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you that this show is brought to you by Game Time. Buying tickets to your favorite event shouldn't be a stressful effort. That's because Game Time is the app you can download right to your phone so that you can get all the tickets you need to all your sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. We now know the NFL schedule, so it's time to book your Steelers tickets for next season. And the best place to do that is Game Time. They give you killer deals, even on last-minute tickets with their best price guarantee that can't be beat. You can also save up to 60% off when you buy last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, and so many different events. Watch, if you want Christmas Day tickets when the Steelers take on the Chiefs, Game Time's got those. Home opener against the Chargers, they got those too. You can play in your trip to Acrisure Stadium to root on your Pittsburgh Steelers. Plus, The Game Time's best price guarantee means that you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less somewhere else, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase, or go to their website, gametime.co. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, let's get your thoughts on Cam wanting to stick with the Steelers with a 3-year extension. Is that even doable? This guy's 35. And I get listen, I've been one who's pushed back into the people who've said, hey, Cam Heyward got hurt last year. He can't play football anymore. And I'm like, this guy's been healthy for the large majority of his career. He's played a very physical position. He can, let's give him the benefit of doubt of that. But I do think it's a good question about if he wants to stay on for 3 years, that is a decent amount of time for the part of his career he's in.
I mean, it is and it isn't. Look, Cam Heyward has been a very healthy individual throughout his career. He's really only had 2 injuries in his entire career. Missed time last year, and he missed time in one other season. So, I don't think there's a reason to suspect, unless, I'm not looking at his medical profile. I'm not in his chart. The Steelers know more than I do. But, if you look at at the back of his football card, there's a lot of 16s and 17s on there in terms of games played. He has not missed time. He missed 9 games in 16. He missed 6 games last year, and that's it. That's been his whole career. So, you should expect him to be healthy. I don't think there's any reason to be afraid of him being injured again just because he was injured last year. The second thing is, okay, how is he going to age at 35? The last time we saw him healthy, he was a Pro Bowl player in 2022. He was very good. He had 10.5 sacks, that the second most he ever had in his entire career, had 14 tackles for loss, a 23 quarterback hits. He's a very, very good player, 2022. Can he be that again? I don't know, maybe. It's not out of the realm of possibility. And how long can he maintain, maybe not that pace, but a respectable pace? He doesn't have to be a star. He doesn't have to be a Pro Bowler to be somebody that the Steelers should want to have around. You got to play 6 defensive linemen. The idea of the Steelers in the next 2-3 years having, drafting or somehow acquiring 5 defensive linemen better than Cam Heyward is not happening. They don't have anybody better. So he's going to be around. And I think this idea that a defensive tackle, I don't know, defensive tackles can play a long time, and not even like Calais Campbell was 37 last year. He hasn't even decided if he's going to play this year or if he's going to hang him up or whatever. But I don't think Calais Campbell was ever as good of a player as Cam Heyward, and he played until he was 37. I mean, you look around, guys that were not even really close to that good of a player get to Tyson Lulu played until he was 35. He, again, nowhere near as good of a player. And maybe you got to go back a little bit farther to find some more examples. But I mean, Ted Washington and Keith Traylor and there's a ton of those old big defensive tackles that Bryant Young that just played forever and ever and ever. And I don't really know why Cam Heyward can't be that. I think, guys get hurt, sure, and maybe that'll happen. Guys decide they want to hang him up. It sure doesn't seem like that's where he is in his head. I don't know why he can't play until he's 37. I think it's a very realistic idea from Cam to say, okay, I've got 3 years left in the tank right now.
He also said, talking about his groin, he was like, hey, he dealt with that last year. He also talked about how his end of season surgery was more so just to kind of balance things out. But he said, right now he feels good and he feels back and ready to go. I think that's important. But I also think it's important to have Cam back so that he can be part of, keeping this team together, because there's going to be questions at times this year. There's going to be some tough times, like just like there were last year. There's going to be times where I think the offense may be still looking for their identity, and like they'll know what their identity is supposed to be, but achieving it on the field is a whole other challenge. And they're going to need their veterans and their leaders to kind of lead the way through the tough games. And the Steelers, they've won. I think they've won the most and the highest percentage of one-score games over the past like 3 or 4 seasons in the NFL. And I think a lot of that's had to do with guys like Cam Heyward, who can keep the ship steady, and I think that's also something that's important to have. So I think Cam Heyward sticking around is good for the Steelers. But the question I have for you, Alan, is how much money makes sense on a per-year basis for Cam Heyward during that time, while the Steelers are going to be wanting to sign guys like George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth, Najee Harris, who are their contracts are coming up soon.
Yeah, I think that's the big question. And, I'm not really sure what Cam wants. There's a couple different ways you can structure it that makes sense. You can just put a number down, and as long as there isn't a guarantee to it, the Steelers are going to be okay with it. So if Cam Heyward says, look, I can play at a $20 million a year level the next 3 years, and the Steelers say, okay, we'll guarantee this year, then you got 2 more years of $20 million a year, like, you can write him down, but if he doesn't write that check, if he doesn't cash that check, then he's going to get cut, right? And so you can agree to that, and I think that's fair. That's fine. If he wants to say that's how good I'm going to be, and he wants to take all the risk on by not taking guaranteed money, go ahead, great, let him. You go the extreme opposite. Cam Heyward could say, I want to play 3 more years and I want to make it real. I want to guarantee myself that this contract is going to get me 3 years. I want to make it so that there's so much guaranteed money early in this contract that the Steelers just are not going to cut me no matter what happens, right? Well, you might have to structure it very differently. The top figure is now going to be very different. And so I'm not really sure. There's a lot of different ways it could look. And it really depends on what Cam is looking for. And he didn't really answer that question other than to be here. It also depends on what the Steelers are looking to do the rest of this offseason. An extension on Cam Heyward could push a lot of his money. He has a $21 million cap hit. Of that, $16 million is salary due this season. They can push almost all of that into future years with a contract extension if they want to make room for a big splash at the wide receiver position, if they want to extend Pat Freiermuth or Najee Harris and bump their cap hits up this year. An extension for Cam Heyward would be necessary. If they're not that interested in that, then maybe they're not as motivated to do it that way. Maybe they're willing to just take that big cap hit on this year and keep things minimal in the future. So I'm not sure we have enough information to really give a number or what a contract might look like. I'm really surprised to hear that he said he didn't think they're close to a deal. I don't think this should be that contentious. The Steelers are generally a franchise that tries to do right by their stars. Cam Heyward is certainly one of those. And even when he was playing at like 50% last year, he was at worst their second best defensive lineman. He's a good player. He's going to continue to be a good, useful player for him for 2 or 3 more years that they have no real irons in the fire in terms of replacing. So why wouldn't you want to have him around? I don't know. I think this deal gets done. I don't think it should be as hard as it's been. So I'm a little confused as to why they're really far apart. Maybe somebody has a demand that's a little bit what I would consider outrageous, but without knowing the details of the numbers that are being passed back and forth, it's hard to say.
How much might this get held up by maybe the Steelers having multiple options on their like if they want to make a splash move for a trade for a wide receiver and they just don't know how much money they need yet, and that might be a factor into, hey, Cam, they're not maybe they're not saying that up to him right up front. Maybe there's some uneasiness there, but maybe Omar Khan sitting in his office is like, we need to know who we want to get first. Then we'll do the Cam situation so we can create how much money that needs to be created. And then you go get your guy after that. And maybe it's all kind of everything's sort of waiting on a few other things to click.
And if you want to tie the two things that we're not sure about together, right? I mean, the reason to be not at OTAs is you're worried about getting hurt and that throwing a wrench in the negotiation, right? That's why you would not report if you're Cam Heyward. And so, if the Steelers they got to a point in negotiations. They said, you know what? Okay, like we're not saying no to this request, but in order to say yes, we got to figure out what we're doing with Pat Freiermuth. We got to figure out what we're doing with wide receiver, and we can't give you an answer right now. It's probably not going to be until the end of training camp until we can really give you a yes or no on this. So like that would put a hard pause in a negotiation. And then Cam could say, all right, forget it. I'll just come back and get ready to play, and we'll deal with it later. I think something like that makes sense. I can't say with any certainty that's what's happening, but if you're looking for a course of events that sort of makes everything make sense, that's certainly one of them.
Certainly, I think that's part of the conversation that will be ongoing as we continue to look at what happens with Cam Heyward and the Steelers focus on how they handle
and don't forget, Cam Heyward said in there he wants to go deep in the playoffs. So
right.
he can't, he has to understand at 35, 36, 37 years old, part and parcel of this deal is going to be making sure the team has enough cap flexibility around him to make that dream happen. Like, it doesn't do him any good to sit there and say, no, I need X dollars and X cents. They've got to find a way to do all these other things that we're talking about too, along with him.
And I think Cam's a person who understands that. I think he's a guy that he sees the big picture. He's always been able to think on his feet. I think that he gets it. And that's why, like you, I think this will be a done deal before long. I was surprised because I didn't know that it was going to happen, him showing up, but I wasn't surprised that it happened at all because Cam Heyward's always been the guy who's been there for the Steelers and been a leader, been a guy who's done the right thing by the team and right thing by his teammates. So I think something will get done because both sides want it to get done, and we just got to see what the final number will be, and maybe there's some things holding it up. But we alluded to the whole point of maybe this is tied to the potential trade for a wide receiver, which is a topic we have covered a lot, especially since the draft. But Alan, you guys wrote a really interesting piece on SteelersNow.com about the receivers who are on the team, not named George Pickens, and how they feel about that. I want to get to that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. He's Alan Saunders. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you, this show is sponsored by BetterHelp Therapy Online. What's the first thing that you do if you had an extra hour in your day? Maybe you'd go for a run. Maybe you'd read a book. Or maybe you'd be there for a friend. But what about being there for yourself? That's where therapy can come in, and therapy can help you find what matters most to you so that you could do more of that. I benefited from the help of a good therapist in my life who's helped me sort out the most important things that I need to balance in my life every single day. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp knows life can be busy and stressful, so it's designed to be suitable for your schedule all throughout however busy you can be. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and then after that, you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, you guys wrote about this. It's on the trade talk. One of the wide receivers lit a fire under some of these backup receivers. In hearing this, and so in a bit of their pride, and we're talking about guys like Calvin Austin, guys like Roman Wilson, guys like Van Jefferson, guys that the Steelers have brought in just this year. Calvin Austin's been here a bit, but these are guys that now they're all trying to prove that, hey, this isn't necessarily. What was the sense that you've heard from these guys? Is this a chip on their shoulder type of thing, or is it just more like hey, I gotta prove it right now?
I don't know about the new guys. I think the new guys to a team are always trying to prove it, right? Like, it doesn't matter. Like, I think for guys like, Van Jefferson, look at where he was in his career compared to where he is, he wants to prove that he can be that guy again. A guy like Quez Watkins, who has shown so many flashes in his career, but has been, so inconsistent on the whole, he wants to prove that he can be that complete player that has escaped him so far. And, when you're a rookie, obviously, like Roman Wilson, you don't even know what you don't know yet at this stage in the game. Like, you're just trying to prove that you don't get lost on your way to, the classroom. And so, but I think for Calvin Austin, man, especially, he's been around. Actually, I was talking to Calvin earlier this offseason. It was pretty funny. And I asked him about, like, hey, you get recognized around town now because, yeah, he didn't play his first year, and Calvin is not, there's some people that walk into a bar and you're like, oh man, I think that guy might be a football player. Yeah, you're not, Calvin's about 5'9", 5'10". He's about 180 pounds. He's not he doesn't look like, oh, he might be a football player. And he said, oh yeah, like it's starting to happen. Like I get recognized and it's cool. And he was talking about that. And I'm like, he has been here long enough though. He hears what the fans are saying. He hears what you and I are saying, what people are talking about the team. And I think he's pretty sick of hearing about how they need a number 2 wide receiver. When I brought it up, it was a pretty, he's not a loud person. He is not like a forceful personality. He was like, yeah, we hear it. And we're motivated by it. And we want to show that we got what we need and that we don't need anybody else. And I was pretty impressed actually by his response to that because, look, he's a 4th round pick. He's not a guy that anybody had, expectations of stardom for. I think people were intrigued by the skill set, but certainly no one was like, hey, this is a surefire thing. But I think he feels like he has a lot more to give than he was able to show last year. I think they're using him in different ways this year. He does not seem to be pigeonholed as a slot receiver. They're moving him around. They're giving him an opportunity to do a bunch of different stuff. And yeah, man, he seems fired up about this. That like he wants that role. And whether he gets it or not, I think it's awesome for him and for the Steelers that's where his mindset is right now.
It's awesome to hear that. It's awesome. I think it's great to see a guy fired up and a guy ready for the challenge, ready to prove himself. But let me ask you this, Alan. Can any receiver prove that in OTAs and then what will be the early part of training camp? Because, even if they unless they're cooking the entire Steelers defense, like if they're doing what George Pickens was doing last year in training camp, but barring being being a ridiculous training camp highlight reel, I think that these guys are kind of in a tough spot that, they're going to have to do something amazing to change the perspective of, at least from the outside of the organization, that there is a legit number 2 roster on this or number 2 wide receiver on this team behind George Pickens. I
think wide receiver is probably the one position on the team, wide receiver and DB, where not being in pads matters the least. They're playing when they're out there playing 7-on-7, for the linebackers, it's like, yeah, well, whatever. We knew that the safeties are like, yeah, it's easy. I had no run assignments. But those receivers and those corners, though, they're just doing their job. It's not really that different. And so, look, they're not going to change the perception of the fan base. I'll just say that right now. The good news for them is they don't need to change the perception of the fan base.
Right.
They need to change the perception of Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan. And they need to convince those guys that say, hey, these ones we got are pretty good. I just watched, so-and-so beat Dante Jackson. I just watched so-and-so smoke Joey Porter. I think they might be able to do it. I don't think we need to trade a 1st round pick and spend $30 million to get Brandon Aiyuk. That's what they, and while there isn't really a competition in terms of player versus player at this stage in the game, you bet that is happening where the Omar and Mike are watching practice with the idea are these the best 90 we can put together? Where are the weaknesses? Where do we need to add to it? Yeah, absolutely. They're looking at the team with that sort of lens, even if they're not allowing for that kind of individual competition that gets reserved for training camp. And so, yeah, I think they do have an opportunity to show something. And I think Calvin Austin's had, if I were to list the guys I think have had really, really solid OTAs that have really impressed me and shown me something I haven't seen out of him before, he's pretty high on that list for me.
Listen, I've liked what I've seen. I've liked Calvin Austin as a whole. I think that he was one of those guys who's just in a rough spot because the offense never really got going, and when the offense isn't going, and you're the 3rd, 4th option on the team at wide receiver, it's going to be tough on you, and you're going to have a hard time proving yourself in those spots there. I think that he has to kind of fight his way through and make sure that he does get established there. I don't know, how good he can be in training camp. Granted, we've seen guys, prove it. Mike Hilton, that was how he earned a job, was he lit it up in training camp, and they were like, well, That's the starting slot cornerback.
Jalen Warren.
Jalen Warren's another one. We weren't sure if that guy was going to make the team. Then all of a sudden it was like, oh no, he's like the number 2 running back. Like this guy's ready to go. So if Calvin Austin comes in and lights it up, and you're right, wide receiver and corner and DBs in OTAs, we can look at those guys a bit differently than we look at a lot of other people who their position depends on physicality and being able to hit. But I still think, even if he does well in OTAs, he needs to hit the ground running in training camp. Like when they're doing their 11-on-11s, when they're doing their 7-on-7s, their 7 shots and all those things, Calvin Austin needs to be catching everything that's thrown to him, limit the drops, show good route running, ability to get separation, ability to work off being pressed at the line. He does those things, then he can quell the questions about the trade. But again, that's a lot to ask.
This might be too late by then, right? I mean, it could happen. Like it could happen in a week. So we'll see.
There's a lot of different things that can happen. We'll keep you up to date here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Alan, thanks so much for joining us here. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
At @Saunders_PGH on X and Instagram. And that's probably it. SteelersNow.com at PGH Steelers. Now, I do have a TikTok account. I think I've made 2 posts, so probably don't.
Alan has a TikTok. I'm scared.
Mostly just to keep tabs on my daughter. That's really the primary goal there. Also, SteelersNow.com at PGH Steelers. Now, got an interesting story coming up tomorrow about talking to some of the same wide receivers about how they're adapting to 2 extremely moldable quarterbacks that love to hold on to the ball and make for interesting scramble drill moments. So I got that coming up as well.
Read all of that at SteelersNow.com. Alan, thanks so much for joining us, and thank you all for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday. Talk about your Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll see you tomorrow with more from OTAs here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.